at any given moment. The iRant Network and the members of the Ranters Union are not responsible for any claims made. All opinions and train of thoughts are welcomed here and protected by the First Amendment and the Ranters Union. All commentary, criticism, news reporting, research, teaching, and or scholarship of copyrighted material is protected by the Fair Use Act under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. iRant Network and the founder of the Ranters Union, Logic, aka Mr. M, recommends that you take what is said and do your own research. Read a goddamn book and form your own opinion. Furthermore, listen carefully to the ranters rant and debate their opinions and form your own conclusion. Thank you for watching this member-supported program, powered by the Ranters Union and produced for the iRant Network. Good day.
Welcome to the spot, the Stacked After Hours spot. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Natalie Cosby. Welcome to the show for the Grown Folk Talk. So tonight, first of all, let me pause. Happy Black History Month. Right? I call it the Real History Month. So tonight we are starting a series around all Black topics, not all Black topics, but topics that definitely affect our community. And so it's the first show for us. We're going to be talking about the battle of the generations, Gen X versus Millennials, and the impact of the generational divide on the culture. So y'all ready? Get your cocktails strong, keep those fingertips loose, because we want to hear your questions and comments on tonight's show. And here at SI, we always keep it lit and enlightening. So let's go. So I'm super excited. Sunshine is off today. So I'm super excited to introduce my co-host, who's a millennial. She's a mini mogul, and she runs her own communications and marketing consultancy for Fortune 500. And her thoughts and opinions are welcome around here because she does this work. Miss Amaris Jones.
Hi, everybody. Hello. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Next, I am proud to call him my family. Not only is my family, he's cool, he's smart, and he loves to debate you until he runs circles around you. And recently an Esquire, Mr. Attorney at Law, Alex Jones, my millennial. Say hey.
Happy to be here. How y'all doing? Happy to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yay! Next, he's my Gen Xer, my educator. He's all about the kids and a world traveler. I want to welcome Mr. Brandon Scott to the spot. Say hello to the people, Brandon.
Hi, everybody. I couldn't see myself, so I didn't know what happened.
See? There you go.
I know I'm dark.
Probably got everybody all confused, right? Brandon's a regular.
Lighting right.
Exactly. Next and finally, I'm super excited. This is their first time on the spot, and we are super excited to hear their voice to this conversation. They are a minister for the queer and trans community, Miss Leo Sage Allen. Welcome to the panel, Leo.
Thank you, Natalie. Glad to be here.
Cool. So this particular topic was really interesting to me because during Christmas, me and Alex actually was having this whole conversation around The Closer, Dave Chappelle's show, his Netflix show. And then what I realized, there's a little bit of a generational divide around this particular topic in the quotes and not the quotes, but the jokes around the LGBTQ community. And so I was like, okay. And I was told I was old and out of touch. I was a little bit in my feelings, but it's okay. It's fine. I didn't take it personal, but I did a little bit. So I wanted to really have a conversation around this and how we deal with cancel culture and a multitude of things that are going around in our community. And I always say for Gen X, I feel like we're the middle child between the boomers and the millennials. So we're always forgotten. We're the latchkey kids. We're the slackers. We're the MTV generation, but we're also the first fully integrated generation that had full civil rights. And we believed in fight the power and was just about loving ourselves and Black is beautiful. Whereas my millennials, when I think about it, y'all are the starters of the BML movement, and you have like all this empowerment, and y'all are visionaries and y'all make things happen. But there's a little bit of entitlement, in my opinion. I'm sorry.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about
that. But Amaris does this work all the time. She supports companies with their DE&I work. So she's going to give us some terms to make sure we are correct. And I am not misspeaking. At least I'm not misquoting about what's next. So go ahead, Amaris. Take us to school.
Totally. And before we go to school, so we have the generational divide in the title of tonight's topic. But again, just want to emphasize this is not a battle. This is not a versus. This is a discussion. This is a safe place, rather. We will have difference of opinions and perspectives based on who we are, where we come from. But again, this is a safe space and it's a conversation. So we want to make sure that we're all using the same language, right? And there's no question marks around the terms that you might hear tonight. So just starting off, as Natalie mentioned, a lot of the jokes and the controversy in Dave Chappelle's The Closer is around the LGBTQ community. So what does that even stand for? Let's just start with the basics, right? So LGBTQ stands for lesbian, a woman who's attracted to another woman, gay, a man who is attracted to other men, bisexual, a person who has the capacity to have a physical or romantic or emotional attractions to the same gender or those of another gender. Transgender, we'll be talking about that community a lot, probably just because a lot of the jokes focused around transgender people. Those whose gender identity is different from the gender they were identified with having at birth. And trans is often used as a shorthand for transgender. So if you hear that, that's what that means. Queer is an adjective used by some people, a lot of times younger generations whose sexual orientation is not exclusively heterosexual, right? A lot of people think that queer is more inclusive and it resonates better with them. And then the Q can also stand for questioning, those who are questioning their sexual orientation or their gender identity. You might also hear LGBTQIA+. So the I, intersex, asexual or agender, not having a gender, or even ally. So that's someone who either confronts heterosexualism or sexism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. Another term you will probably hear is cisgendered, and I know this is a lot, so we can revisit as we're going through the discussion. But let's start, just going through the vocabulary. Cisgendered is a person who identifies with the gender they had when they were born. So, for example, I'm a cisgendered woman, right? I identify as a female at birth and identify as a woman today. I think it's also important to point out that this term is not about sexual preference. It's about gender itself. Let's marginalize is another one we might hear. We'll talk about like a marginalized community. What does that mean? A group that has been treated historically as insignificant, or a group that's been on the peripheral, right? So like Black people have been marginalized historically, LGBTQ plus. Another big term that's hot right now. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. Another term that's hot right now is intersectionality. This one is a little complex, but it deals with the way things are interconnected and they overlap, right? Like we're not monolithic. There are a lot of different things that make us up. So it talks about the way race, class, gender, and other characteristics intersect and collide. Privilege is another concept that we will probably visit. And actually, it's so funny. In the beginning of the closer, Dave Chappelle says, "Before I can start, I want to say I'm rich and I'm famous." And he goes on to say, "The only reason why I say that is because the last 17 months talking about the pandemic have been hell, and he can't imagine what everybody went through." So that's what we mean when we say privilege. It's a lot of times we think of it in the context of white privilege, right? But privilege is when simply having an advantage that's only granted to or available to a particular person or group. And then let's end with culture, right? Culture is simply the people, places, things, and the beliefs of a specific group. So the way we dress, the way someone speaks, what they value, what they believe in, those are all parts of their culture. So high level, there might be some other things that we discussed, but wanted to make sure we were starting from the same page.
Thank you, Amaris, for that mini lesson.
No problem. I'll send notes afterwards. I'll send notes.
It is a whole lot, right?
It is.
It is a whole lot. But so I want to get back to and that's what Amaris is right. This is not a versus, but what it is how we see based on where we came into this world. And I want to really start. I found this clip and I realized this culture, especially in the Black community around the LGBT, whatever, has been something that has kind of been going on for a really long time. So I found this clip from Arsenio Hall. Mr. M, go ahead and roll it, and we're going to talk about it because I think it kind of sets the tone of where me as a Gen Xer, me and Brandon as the Gen Xers on the panel is what we kind of see. But go ahead.
Don't know whether they're gay or not. You know? Now, sexual preference, so we don't know whether they're gay or not. You know? Now, sorry, why don't I have any gay guests on my show? Well, there are a lot of gay guests who really don't like to talk about their sexual preference, so we don't know whether they're gay or not. You know? Now, this ain't Merv. You didn't think I'd run from this, did you? This ain't Johnny. I ain't gonna run from it. I'm gonna deal with it. You know what I'm saying? Now, who would you like me to have on my show that's gay that maybe I haven't had? Who? I don't know Gus Van Sant, but I know Elton John. He's been here and he's rocked the house. Okay? Okay? What? When Harvey has something I'm interested in, I'll bring him on the show. But this is my show, okay? I'm sorry, why don't I have any gay guests on my show?
We'll stop it there. We'll go ahead.
Gay guests.
So when I felt that, I think he was like, this is my show and I need for you to sit down. Because I feel like it is like I'm inclusive, but don't tell me who I should have on my show. And I think it's a little bit of what Dave Chappelle was probably feeling. And I really want to talk about starting in there and thinking about what Dave Chappelle was speaking about and even Arsenio's sentiment. I'm going to start with Brandon because he is my Gen Xer. The perspective of that whole energy around the LGBT community and what we as Gen Xers, kind of how we come into this space, dealing with the comments of the closer and even what Arsenio Hall was dealing with within that segment.
Well, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah, and especially coming from the background that I come from, a religious, extremely religious background, as well as being an educator now. So I'm always in a place that I want to learn and understand that, yes, I was raised a certain way. Yes, I believe a certain thing, but I always feel like we can learn from each other and support each other in the best way we know how. So I'm not quick to cut things off or whatever. I think that Arsenio today would have a different response than Arsenio of the 90s, just because we've all grown and evolved. So the clip has a certain relevance because at that time, for somebody to even wear a shirt like that and stand up at a show like that was huge, especially with the hate around it. The hate is still there today. So imagine what it was almost 30 years ago in that community, towards that community. So I think it's something different though with Dave Chappelle. I think as we get into the conversation further, I think that what he was more so talking about is that two things can exist in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was talking about, can somebody be racist and gay? Absolutely. So I think things can happen in the same place. And the conversation to me was bigger about that, as we saw the lady who called the cops and acted like the bird watcher in Central Park was assaulting her. She had given thousands of dollars to Obama's campaign. You know, she was this leftist Democrat. But deep down, it came out what she really thought when she made that call and tried to act like he was attacking her, because she knew privilege, the response it would get. Right. So I think it's two bigger conversations that can take place about what was going on in our Arsenio Hall clip and what I feel like Dave Chappelle, being we're the same age, was trying to get a message out in his own artistic way.
Okay. All right. Alex?
Yeah, I agree to an extent because, you know, the 90s were a totally different time, right? When I watched the clip that you just showed, I think what struck me immediately was the sense of combativeness that was happening, not necessarily between Arsenio Hall and the individuals that were standing, but the whole environment. And I think, you know, I heard chants, I heard, you know, like, I don't know if they're like monkey chants or whatever they were, but it just felt like it was an us versus them type scene. And I don't think Arsenio Hall was trying to convey that, but I felt like that was the environment. And when it comes to, you know, the closer, you know, I also think Dave Chappelle is one of the best storytellers. I think he's supremely talented. The issues that I think that that have been brought to the forefront and what he has been saying, I think are more centered around how he went about talking about the community. And it felt like it was, I wouldn't say a knee-jerk reaction, but more of like, I'm going to discuss what I think about the community from a vantage point of somebody who was not part of the community. And I feel like with somebody of that platform, it's important that you do service to individuals who you don't understand the experience, and you do service to individuals who are marginalized in a lot of ways. And I think as well, there's this kind of touchy subject that I think has brought to the forefront of what he's been saying and what has happened lately with the baby and other incidences happening between the Black community and LGBTQ. There's kind of this us versus them mentality, where it's like, because LGBTQ community is uprising, about what's happening with the closer, this is going against like Black people. It felt like it was very, tribalistic in a way. And I hate that sentiment because I feel like it flattens the idea that there's a marriage between these two communities, right? Like there are a lot of individuals who are LGBTQ who are Black. And when we go down this like route, it just flattens their experience. And I think that, go ahead.
I want to say something because I watched it as well last night. And the one thing he said in the beginning, and I want to go into, Leo, I wanted you to answer this because you are the one trans person on this. He said something really clear. I was like, oh, and the whole story, he's like, this is the story. And if you listen, you really hear what I'm saying. He's just like, he's like, what? He's like, this is not about transgender. It's really about, he said, if I get into a fight with a Black trans, they ain't gonna call the cops because we know what it's gonna happen. He's like, but it's really about how whiteness sometimes transcends and they don't understand my struggle. It was like, basically, I will be, he's like, whether it's trans or whatever, I will be the person that's in jail, right? So he's like, it's always for me been about the systems of oppression. And he was just like, so this is not, he said, this is actually not towards the Black trans community. And I was like, I don't know, I didn't hear that the first time, the second time I heard it. But go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, I think you just brought up the point that I wanted to focus on, in particular with that Arsenio segment, because I have, as Alex has said, others have said, I have tremendous respect for Dave Chappelle being a master artist of his craft. There's nobody like him. And at the same time, Arsenio Hall, that show was groundbreaking, right? And to see those, what I'm going to presume were cisgender gay white men in the audience, there was a combativeness, as Alex mentioned. And it does point to the fact that, white supremacy culture shows up everywhere. It is in and through the LGBTQ community. We have our own issues around racism, sexism, even colorism. So that's what I saw in the Arsenio clip. It may be a question of representation, where at the same time, these are cisgender white men, regardless of the fact that they were gay at that time. Yes, that's looked down on significantly. Yes, they were given less resources for like things like health, but at the end of the day, they have more privilege than Arsenio, a cis straight Black man. And then with Dave Chappelle, when you talked about him saying this is not for the Black trans community, that's my biggest question for him, is in like, okay, so because there are those of us who exist who are Black and are trans, so who is it really for? And I also wonder, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, like, what if the person telling the joke, like Dave Chappelle did, was a Black trans person? Would we even be debating this because this person has that identity, right? That intersectionality of being Black and trans. So do they have permission to say it?
Go ahead, Amaris, I know you had a question.
No, I'm just listening to everyone, and I'm hearing, we were talking about the spirit of kind of combativeness in the Arsenio Hall clip. And what I felt was offensiveness on both sides. Him defending who he is, his platform, the ownership that he has through the show, and that being challenged. And it was the same thing that was happening on the other side in terms of the person in the audience, right? And I feel like perhaps Dave Chappelle, and I'm speaking out loud in real time, he used his platform in an artful way to address some of the comments about him being transphobic, etc., in an artful way through his platform, through this particular program. But because he's not from the community, you know, is that one of the biggest issues, right? From a representation perspective, and people feeling comfortable with, you know, him joking around some of the things, really the challenges and plight of a marginalized community. So
I'm gonna speak as a Gen Xer. I think part of it, and what I saw with Arsenio and Dave within our Blackness, is like, you're not gonna shut me up.
Right. And
like,
Dave even says that in the backlash.
I think part of it is like, we've never had the opportunity to be free and speak freely. And I think Dave Chappelle was doing exactly what Dave Chappelle always does. And to expect him to do different is somewhat like, you're disrupting my art. You're disrupting me. And my experience is as uncomfortable as this conversation may be, is, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think that's also the thing around it, because I think that's is that the intersectionality part of it a little bit?
I mean, it could be. You even see in his comment around the backlash, right? He says, I'll have a conversation, but you're not going to summon me. Right? Like, let's be clear. This is my show. You're not going to summon me. You know, I'm open to dialogue. And we saw it in Arsenio Hall as well. He said, I had Elton John on the show and he rocked the house. What, you know, but one thing you're not going to do is silence me. And that could, just to your point, you know, we've been fighting for a voice. We've been fighting for a platform as Black people. But again, in terms of intersectionality, we're also have to be mindful of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and members of that community. And I think that's where some of the larger issue comes in.
Go ahead. Someone said, Jeff Brown, could someone please explain homophobia? We'll get to that. We're gonna pause on that. I want to continue on this vein.
So you don't want me to go back to my dictionary?
Girl.
I'll put it in the chat. We got homework, follow-ups.
Right. So since we do have a generation, it is about the generational divide. So what could have Dave Chappelle done differently? Or what do y'all think could have been done differently? Or what did he do right? Was he wrong? Based on
what is the controversy? Right?
What is the controversy?
We're hitting on points of it.
Right. Because I think my generation is kind of like, I'm not gonna speak. Continue. Go ahead.
Can I jump in here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just going back to what I saw in the Arsenio clip, one of the things I saw was that this question again of like representation, right? And these white gay men wanting to be seen, I guess, or recognized, but it's on a Black man show, and we know how Black folks in general, but especially Black entertainers, strive to have a space to call their own, right? For Black artists to do that, how significant that is. And I agree with you, Natalie, that it did seem like they were trying to overstep his show, his platform. But a question for me is, like, this is, to me, not a surprise. Anybody who's watched any Dave Chappelle sketch, stand-up comedy special, and at least the last 10 years, it's not a surprise. Like, for him to throw punches and say things that some people may want to say, and he just cuts the BS and just says it, regardless of how you feel about it. He doesn't care about your feelings. Like he says in the special, it's about it being funny. And he's like, just let me be funny. So to me, I wasn't really surprised by it, but I think the reason why it stirred up so much controversy and continues to be a point of pain for some people in the LGBTQ community is because there's more representation of trans people, and there's more awareness that Black trans women are the highest killed demographic in this country. They are facing violence at levels that is disproportionate to white trans women, to gay folks, you know, to cis Black women. And that, ironically, Black trans women being in danger, their lives being in danger, you can draw parallels to Black cis women whose lives also have historically and continue to be in danger, right? And continue to be marginalized. So I think for me, it wasn't surprising. Like when I heard about it before I saw the show, I was like, oh, okay. And I thought it was going to blow over because I'm like, anybody who knows Dave Chappelle knows this is his stick. This is what he does.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
exactly.
I representation. Now everybody's eyes and ears are like feeling really sensitive. So if you say something about my community, I'm going to like attack.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
That's a good point. And I think that goes back to the times that we're in and understanding the context in which we're living, right? So 1993, flashback to Arsenio Hall, in terms of the mindfulness, the conversations, the emphasis on representation, the emphasis on ensuring that every member of every community is seen, the fight for against inequities and for equality has so much more momentum right now, right? So people are heightened to it. People are using, and we have more platforms to voice our opinions, right? And to call people out and to share our stories. So I think the times that we're in also create just this environment where people I guess are expected to be more mindful, and there's going to be backlash and potential repercussions. But again, knowing who Dave is, knowing how he delivers, knowing how he tells his stories, where is there a line that needs to be drawn, right? And when is it that you can speak your truth the way you speak it? And really, it's everybody speaking their truth, right? And kind of fighting for the space to be heard and seen.
Right. I mean, I agree. And I want to, like, are we really go ahead. I'll answer Amaris's question first. Alex or whomever.
Yeah. I feel like I had a few things that were bothering me when I was watching it. I mean, first off, the show was called like Sticks and Stones or something. I think that was like kind of the title of it. Yeah. Right. And so it felt like the whole vibe was like based on, trying to like say that I'm about to be canceled, so I'm gonna say these things because they're incendiary, and there's like this big market nowadays for canceling, and then the repercussions that come from canceling, and you can like make a lot of money if you like push the envelope enough. And I felt like that was kind of, and I know that's kind of his art, and I know that that's what's great about Dave Chappelle a lot of times, but also I felt like there was an issue when it comes to comedy that punches down, and I felt like he was punching down on purpose in a way that wasn't necessarily helpful. And I do understand that, he was trying to tell his truth, but at the same time, it was through the prism of, a Black straight man. And I don't think a Black straight man's truth, especially a straight man of that platform, can do service to somebody who is as marginalized. So I felt like those were the few things for me that just kind of bothered me about it, because it just felt like he was trying to antagonize more than be insightful.
Yeah. Can I read the Guardian quote, Natalie?
Go ahead.
I think it's relevant here. So in the Guardian, there was the comic Dahlia Bell accused Dave of using Dorman, the trans comedian, I think that he mentioned in the closer, as a rhetorical, as a shield without actually caring for her, right? So she wrote that Chappelle essentially made Dorman out to be the good tranny. These are quotes. And the way that white people held up Jackie Robinson and other Black people they deemed to be respectable as good Negroes. So essentially, he was using her to, in a part of his story, in a way that did not show care or mindfulness for who she was and her being and her identity, which goes back to the representation, which is why it struck a chord, right, with the LGBTQ community.
That was his way of saying, like, I'm not racist.
Right.
I'm not racist.
I have a Black friend.
Right.
Was it that?
But
I totally disagree.
That's a perspective.
He be drinking, so maybe something came out. He was lit.
He was lit.
Well, he always is when he does his art form.
Right, I think
that's what he performs his best at. But I totally disagree. I don't think that was his "I have a Black friend" moment. I felt like he was speaking from his experience with a person that was transgender, and it fit the conversation that he was talking about. I think the fact that we're even sitting here talking about it now opened up the conversation. And for me, having listened to a lot of people from all different types of backgrounds, being a world traveling, seeing like people talk about like marginalized groups and then like how they're affected or whatever. Like you can't help someone unless you're having a conversation about how people are truly feeling. So if you're going to put it in today's context and say, okay, let's never talk about slavery. Let's never talk about the Holocaust. Let's never talk about anything bad that's happened to people because, it's a tricky category, right? Mm-hmm. And we see what can happen to people, like what happened to Whoopi Goldberg getting suspended, with her just speaking about what she felt. And had she been educated enough to explain her point, she actually was right.
She was.
When you go back to what is known as race.
Right.
And they fall under the same causacoid, is that how you say it? Caucasian, causacoid, like we're Negroids. They fall under the same race, Jews and whites, that did this to them. So wasn't necessarily a race thing, but I think this opens up conversation. Like Dave Chappelle opened up a conversation that needed to be had. That one of the things he said in that was that he wished Black people could organize like the LGBTQ.
There's a little bit of jealousy and envy.
And that's what he said.
And he says that.
And then he
I think that's what because he's like, clearly the white sector of the LGBT community is because again, I mean, we do live in white supremacy, the white constructs and all of that shit. But the privilege within the Black community around the LGBT community is deep. And it's been going on, I mean, before some of y'all were even born, right? And when I think about it, and I'm going to roll this thing with Amanda Seales in a minute, but I just want to get this point across. I agree with you, Brandon. I think it's opened the conversation that my generation and baby boomers weren't willing to have. It's like people would keep things in the closet. You had a rise of men on the DL, Black women getting AIDS. So the beautiful thing about millennials and latter generations is that it has forced us to look at our own things that are going on in our community. But Ms. M, let's roll this Amanda Seales video around her take on Dave Chappelle with Jamil Hill. Go ahead.
We have to look at it from a macro view. And the macro is that our community as Black people continues to disassociate ourselves in a large way from the LGBTQIA plus members of our community. So we have to acknowledge the truth of that first and foremost. Then we have to acknowledge our unique privileges and understanding that even as Black folks who are not privileged in very clear ways as it relates to white supremacy, as it relates to the variance in our melanin, as it relates to police brutality, even in the realness of that, if you are a cisgendered Black person that is also a heterosexual, you do exist in a certain particular place of privilege. Because at the end of the day, the world is set up for you by and large. And when I say cisgendered heterosexual, I mean you were born with female or male body. If you were born with female body parts and you identify as a woman and you date folks that are cisgendered men. I have to say it macro in that way because when we realize, when we acknowledge all of those things, we then understand how our words show up.
We're going to pause it there.
And it is.
All right. So coming back to the conversation, and Dave in his privilege and the privileges that have formed around these issues in the Black community. Is there privilege within us about this conversation, even with the LGBT community, and how we can, and the whole cancel culture and so on and so forth? I'll let Leo go ahead and speak. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that clip is where I would hope one day that my baby boomer parents will get to. And and I really it's so interesting because like this is the generational divide, but Gen X and millennials are so close. And the word millennials still getting thrown around. I'm like, y'all, we old. We in our 30s. We are not.
Right. We're on the cusp. I always say we're on the cusp. Like we remember the teachings of yesterday, but we were there in the beginnings of the new thinking, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
But the way that Amanda has articulated that to Jamel Hill is where I hope that we can be, these three kind of big generations, but especially Gen Xers and millennials, to be able to accept that even if we have differences of opinions about, I mean, honestly, it's about another person's existence in the world. That's kind of what it is, right? Like you might feel the way you feel about the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're, with us or you're not really with us, but just the level of like understanding the types of privileges that we have that exist in the community. Like if you're not gay or queer or trans, right? Just acknowledging that, I think it sets a baseline of respect. Then we could come to the table, as Brandon was saying earlier, and have the dialogues and have the conversation. I think she hit the nail on the head saying, we just got to acknowledge that there's a part of our community that we have marginalized. And by doing that, unfortunately, we're just repeating what white supremacy has done to all Black people. And so where do we stop that cycle and say, no, we're going to embrace all of us and say all Black lives matter, including the trans kids that I don't understand in my family, or my gay uncle who had to be in the closet for 50 years. But when we actually say that and put that as a baseline, I think we can have these respectful conversations. But some people can't even come there. And that's where the dilemma is.
And I think that's what I want to talk about, what is going on? Because I think we struggle. I mean, I admit I have blind spots about it. Me and Alex went at it Christmas. And I understand. I can understand that I have a blind spot about it. I'm really cognizant of pronouns and everything. But I think it's also frustrating because it gets confusing. I know for me, sometimes I'm like, wait, what did I just call her or her when she's a trans masculine they? And I was like, well, what happens if they got kids? They call them mama, daddy,
well,
parent. Like seriously. I thought about that.
And Natalie's comment reminded me of what I think maybe it was Leo who said this earlier, is like we're even at thinking about, well, I don't get it, or what does that mean, is really talking about someone's existence. If we think about each other as humanity, right, and respect where everyone's coming from and everyone's journey, I think starting there is where we have to be, right? And even at the end of the special, Dave even said, empathy is not gay. He said, empathy is not Black, empathy is bisexual. Now, you can play with the words, but his point was it goes both ways, right? And we have to take a step back and really not even try to understand the mechanics and the logistics and the how and the when, but more so, who are you, and respecting that, right?
But yeah,
That wasn't a question. That was a comment. That was on my heart. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
That wasn't a question.
No.
Um,
Go ahead, Brandon.
oh, Alex, were you going to go?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Or
I
Alex.
was going to touch on the point, and I think, Natalie, you stated it earlier. I think a lot of people in our generation are taken back by it somewhat because we view it as a distraction. Because we understand, like, we still have a long ways to go as a community in general. And then when we start bringing these other things in, what happens is we start thinking of it as like, listen, I see you, I acknowledge you, but right now we got to get this done because we're still struggling here and we're still fighting for this. And I think sometimes it feels like the millennials are really disconnected from the original movement, the civil rights movement, because of the privileges that they've had the benefit of having because of what my parents and grandparents did, and that I was connected to because I was able to sit at my grandmother's feet who marched with Martin Luther King and hear her stories and hear about what that day was like. Whereas that is a disconnect with her grandchildren, who are 19 and 20, and her great grandchildren, because they didn't get that same feeling and respect I did being the second born grandchild of the 19 of us. And so that's where my struggle comes in sometimes because I'm so big on the movement and what the movement can be, because I see it in education, being an educator and an elementary educator. I see the setup and the struggles that our kids are still going to go through because we're still fighting this battle. And it's not that I want to disrespect any of them because like they name these things at a very young age. I have 4th and 5th graders who will tell you, Mr. Scott, don't put me in a boy-girl line. Like I don't want to be called, say, go put the boys line or you got to stand in the girls line type thing. So they are very clear on it. And even being able to do that, that's a privilege because when I was in school, you absolutely wouldn't have been able to talk back to your teacher or anybody and say,
right, let's like starting there.
Exactly,
Voicing.
There. So I think what happens is we really got to find a way to chew gum and walk, right? Like we gotta address this in our community because their lives absolutely matters. But we still got to continue to fight for those things that we know we haven't accomplished in our community. And again, we all can do that together way better than keeping it as a separate thing, know. And it happened even in the civil rights movement. His name is slipping me now, but he probably would have been the Martin Luther King had he not been out as gay.
Yes.
Was it Raynard? Yeah, what was that man's name? Raynard, yeah. Like he was, a prolific and eloquent speaker, expositor, and was really in the movement and, was right there with Martin Luther King, but there was no way. And we all understand why it's so tough in the Black community because of our religious views. And it's hard for grandma to not condemn you to hell if you tell her you gay, right?
Yeah.
And so that thing is there where everything, and me being from the South, definitely, well, hell, fire, and brimstone is preached. Anything you do, you going to hell. You know what I'm saying? So like that is what we're coming out of. You know, my generation is taking on learning and expanding our religious views even further.
Right.
Than that type of speak.
Yeah.
So I think, it's getting there, but these conversations has to take place.
Right.
Yeah.
I was gonna go ahead, Al. I was gonna let Alex go, and then Amaris was gonna come back. So go ahead.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate what Brandon is saying, and I understand, and I feel like what he was saying about doing things that haven't been accomplished, or just kind of doing the things that we were supposed to do with the civil rights movement. I feel like, and I'm one of the last millennials, so I'm a 96er. So I'm like on the back end. So I'm kind of like with Gen Z, like my little sister. Millennial. I'm the last millennial. So like I'm kind of on the farther end of the spectrum when it comes to millennials. But I would say that I think we're building off of what Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement would have wanted. And I think what you guys were saying earlier, this is not, just about Black or white or, LGBTQ. It's a human issue at the end of the day. And I think that what we're trying to build off of, which was the core issue of the civil rights movement, is also a human rights thing. And I understand, and my mom and my grandfather, they have issues with messing up names and messing up, can I call that person that or whatnot. But at the same time, I understand, like, it's tough. Like, change is tough, progress is tough, and I do think there has to be a level of empathy that individuals who have more experience dealing with change, they have to have more patience and empathy dealing with people who haven't experienced it. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, this is humanity, and we should have empathy for all types of struggles. And if we're really going to support what the civil rights movement was all about, then we have to ensure that, we're dealing with injustice and we're dealing with, discrimination in any facet. So that's just what I think.
And I think the most important, this platform was a platform for healing, but also understanding. And there's a lot of healing that needs to go on within our community around this, the secrets, the shame around it, the church, to, even again, being accepted and marrying because you don't want to be outed. You don't want to be, I have friends that are gay and they are still in the closet to this day that are my age and are struggling with that, because I'm just like, boo, come out. But they will never, ever admit that that's where they are, because they have they're still.
The scars are fresh.
The scars are real, right?
Yeah.
The scars are really real. And when I think about Arsenio talking about they don't want to come out, because also the shame, right? And there's still there that shame that lives there. And that was just on my heart. But I think about it and I was just like, there's a lot of healing around that, especially if you can. I mean, I'm from the church, I'm from the South. And I think it's really something we so want to fit into the American construct that it becomes toxic to a certain extent. But go ahead, Amaris.
No, I was just going to echo what Alex said, and it's change is tough. And I think with as we build on our movement and look at what needs to be done, the healing that needs to be done, the progress that needs to be made, what we're doing is really looking at that work and that reality through different lenses, right? Additional lenses. And it's really, I think, a mindset shift. But we do, to your point, Natalie, have to heal before we can really move on. But we have to do both together, right? That's all.
And I think the other thing is like, I want Dave Chappelle to still be Dave Chappelle. I'm sorry. I think that's the beauty, because it sparks these conversations. I think that's important. And I think he has to be able to take it as well as he gives it. Right.
And I think he did.
He did. He responded. Right? He responded. And so when I think about what happened with Whoopi Goldberg this week getting canceled for the whole, calling Holocaust, it wasn't about race and so on and so forth.
So this brings me to a question about cancel culture, right? Cancel culture, is it helpful? Is it harmful? Is it both? Because I think just working, so I have a consultancy, as Natalie mentioned, working with companies in all sectors, at all sizes, and helping them think through, okay, so when this is happening, what do we say? What do we do? Are we going to get canceled? Or is there going to be backlash? Like, is this going to reflect negatively on the company? And where do we speak? What place do we speak from? Hold on, I just lost my train of thought because I got fired up. Cancel culture. Where are we coming from?
Where are we with cancel culture?
It'll come back. Let's just start there.
Let's open that.
Is it harmful?
We don't have that much time, but I want to I want to go ahead and dive into that. So Are y'all out here canceling folks?
Some
There's
folks
We have
need
it.
some people who deserve to
the
be
wrong
canceled.
folks.
Oh, now I know my point really quickly. But we have to be careful with cancel culture, I think, in my opinion, because if we cancel somebody and then there's no discussion, there's no context. Well, where was Whoopi coming from? Why did she make that comment, right?
Right.
What was her thought process and what was the point she was trying to make? If that follow-up doesn't happen, then it's not helpful. Like back, I think around the murder of George Floyd, brands we're not going to have Aunt Jemima, serve
Right,
anymore. Well, some people don't even know the history of who she was, right?
Right.
So there's a part of that we need to be careful about, I think.
Right. So let's go straight into this. We're gonna have a real quick round about cancel culture, because I think that's one of the things that we could all learn something from the whole. So are we really, I mean, the point of, is it really useful? I guess. I mean, Trump needed to be canceled and he never was. People who needed to be canceled were never really canceled. But
Well,
let's
that's
Right.
where the
go.
privilege
I
comes
mean,
into play.
like,
And is there privilege in cancel culture?
privilege in
Is
it,
that a
yeah.
factor?
go ahead, Brandon.
It exists in every aspect when we talk about it. We've seen it come up in everything that we've talked about tonight. That's still the bottom line, is privilege, right? R. Kelly absolutely needed to be canceled. Like, definitely. I miss his music because I was a huge fan.
Oh, same.
That was
TP2.com.
my generation, but I can't bring myself to do it, especially as an educator.
Ugh.
Never, but it still doesn't
Remind
say
me of
he
my
wasn't.
Jeep with the jam. Don't get it twisted.
Listen, it's not saying he wasn't artistic, and some people in our culture still say. I just say I can't. Not as an educator, I cannot. I have to let him go. But then you do have, Trump says so many things as president and even before, and none of it mattered, or it didn't change anything, or nobody came after him. So of course, privilege existed there. I think that it does have to be this certain aspect of checking people, especially if they're spewing lies. It's one thing to just not know about something or be uneducated about something, but if you're intentionally spreading lies about something or someone, then like we need to get rid of that type of thing, so you can be canceled. But if it's just like something like what Whoopi did, which is her opinion, but it's such a sensitive topic, that you just can't. I wish it was the same way for us in the Black community, but it's not. So we know privilege exists even about the Holocaust over what exists about slavery. Because
we're gonna let you. I'm gonna hold it right there, Brandon.
All right.
We're gonna take that conversation to the after party. We got 2 minutes. I just want Alex and Leo's opinion, and then we're gonna talk about empathy. We're gonna close out, and then we're gonna go. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I don't like the public atonement version of cancel culture. I don't think it serves any purpose. I think a lot of it is just using cancel culture as a weapon to kind of advance your political position or advance your political side. And we're in a polarized society nowadays. So I feel like cancel culture as an idea and as a use has been weaponized in that way. What I do think is important, though, is if you're going to say something that is offensive, I mean, just because you're artistic or just because you have an opinion doesn't mean you can't get, smoked for it. I mean, I just don't understand that. I think that if you have, the right to say whatever you want to say, then people have the right to comment on it, and you should expect that. And I think that's, as much as should be, honestly.
All right, Leo, I'm gonna give you the last word before we go out. Love, go ahead.
I appreciate it. Yeah, this is my opinion. It comes from me. Cancel culture isn't actually real. Cancel culture is like a myth, because it's interesting how we treat celebrities in our society and the ways in which we will cape for them and protect them. But they're a privileged class. They're elites. And so I don't actually think cancel culture is real. When you have a certain level of privilege and power, you can't be actually canceled. The term, I think, has been used to weaponize people who want to try to call out something that they feel is unjust. But actually canceling people is not actually real. Now, what we have done is this throwaway culture where we say people are disposable. That is a real problem.
And we're going to take that into the after party. So we're about to wrap it up. Thank y'all again. We didn't have enough time to get through everything, but y'all, this was a panel of Black excellence for real. So thank you, Amaris, for your input. Thank you, Brandon, for your insight for the kids. Alex and Leo, thank you so much. The link for the after party is in the Facebook group. Join us. We'll be there in 5 minutes, 5. I will see y'all next week. We'll be talking about Black love and all the other things, everything Black. Happy Black History Month again. See y'all next week. Take care. Thank you so much. Take us out, Mr. M.
Yeah. Mama had a baby and the baby wasn't happy about the world that he was living in. This shit is fucking crazy. He was moving through the system and the system tried to raise him as a slave in the system, but he switched up in his ways and then learned about the murder and the contradicting logic of the system he was living in. The human is a product of persuasive education, turn a human to an object, and the object of the game is to find a way to tame all the people on the planet, to control it, to command it, but it starts inside the brain, the conditioning implanted in the mind of the people, and to over understanding education from the slave master. Everybody dancing to the rhythm of the killing and the lying and the stealing. Deconstruction of the buildings we was building for our children, gave our children to the system for the system to devour, turn our men into cowards and our women into weapons, and the soul. What about the soul and the body of the temple to the gods that's in everybody's body, and the soul is the body and the energetic presence of the person at the essence. It will travel through dimensions to the places that are mentioned on the papers that are written by the ancients, putting every human in position day and night. Day and night. Yeah, know where you going, pick what you choosing. Take your heart with you on the path that you are pursuing. Moving steadily moving whenever you're moving. Put your all in, even when falling, you'll never be losing. I mean, you'll never be what you'll never be, but you can be what you can't. And you can do what you never done, and you'll become what you ain't. I mean, like, you can be what you never thought that you can be. If you do the things you never thought that you can do, you gotta do into the future what you didn't used to do. So, swimming in the femininity of a feminine energy. And I am a masculinity with a passive energy. I am the truth that lies on the path of my enemies. I am the truth that lies in the past of my enemies. I am the past that remains in the future of the present. I am the present that remains in the future of the past. I am the gift of life and the life of the gifted. Becoming the burden of relief when the burden is lifted.